Okay, Guru Nation, we are going to do a special video by popular demand and request beyond the CRA role. And where do I think the CRA role is headed? So I actually think the CRA role is not going anywhere. I do think it's staying, but it is evolving, and it's been evolving. You're still going to have site visits. I don't think technology is going to replace those. However, the frequency of the site visits has already been changing. That's been changing from the risk-based monitoring days, and it's changing even more so now with new tools like AI coming out. Even the fundamentals of what CRAs do, meaning if you distill it to first principles, a CRA is supposed to prevent protocol deviation from happening at the site. That's number one. Number two, they're supposed to catch things that have already happened that maybe the site's unaware of. GCP deviations, protocol deviations, site SOP deviations. They're supposed to question and, I guess, remedy, ideally before the issue happens, but more often than not, the issue already happened and they have to remedy it after. So that a lot of what I just mentioned is eventually going to be done by AI co-pilots. So a CRA is going to be sitting at their laptop, AI co-pilot next to them. This will all be regulated and validated. They're probably already using it unofficially without telling anyone. It's very easy to have an AI spot a deviation. It's not so easy to get the site to correct it. It's not so easy to retrain the site. It's not so easy to convince the site, hey, you're headed down the wrong path. Like I know where this road ends. This road's eventually going to end with a pretty catastrophic deviation. And by catastrophic, we mean patient safety. So things like out of window visits, I mean, those are not even worth discussing. They're not um they're not major deviations. AI and actually just simple alerts like from the EDC can already capture those for sites. Sites have, like our site uses CRIO, CRIO, and we can program, alerts for out of window visits and things like that. It's very simple. That's old technology. But the new stuff's gonna get more complex, and I think that's where you're gonna start getting into like prior concomitant medications, prior medical conditions, going through all the medical history of that patient and matching it up against the inclusion-exclusion criteria, which has historically been the realm of a CRA. And they're still going to be doing that, but they're going to have a lot of tools at their side. So what are they going to spend most of their time on? Instead of spending their time on looking for these things, these things are already going to be found, ideally, by the AI, and they're going to spend their time proactively, or I guess after the fact, remedying these issues. And that's the part you can't outsource. That's the part where you still need a trusted relationship. And ideally, it has to be the CRA because the sites typically work best with one person from the CRO or the sponsor, and that's typically their CRA. They need somebody they can rely on for bouncing questions off of, somebody they can rely on for issues they're encountering in real time, access to certain portals. These CRAs are the gatekeepers for all this stuff. So the role of a CRA is evolving, although it's fundamentally not going anywhere. It's shifting in the sense of on-site monitoring, the technology being augmentation of the more mundane tasks of like hunt and find deviations, which used to be very manual. That's being automated. and I think that's a good thing. And then there's a lot of things like automating the source data verification, source data review. So this allows the CRAs to focus on more complex issues. And while this role's not going away, and I don't necessarily think we will have a surplus of CRAs, I do think I'm an optimist in this sense. I think the industry is gonna just do more studies, especially if the macroeconomic factors line up as well. I think the industry is gonna have more studies to work with. So you're gonna have possibly a need for even more CRAs, actually, because I don't think the AI is gonna actually reduce the site burden that the CRAs are given. Like a CRA may actually be given more sites. I don't know if they'll be given more studies. Typically, a CRA is given like 6 to 10 sites and maybe 1 or 2 studies. I don't know if that changes to 30 sites and 3 or 4 studies. I don't think that's the case. If that's the case, I think they're given more sites, not more studies. Um, because you still need ultimately the CRA is the protocol expert, and I know it's this PI because that's their responsibility. And I know it's really the coordinator because they're the one doing all the work. But if you break down the amount of studies a coordinator has on average versus the amount of studies the CRA has, the CRA has less. So therefore, the logical way to look at it is the CRA should be the expert by far more than the coordinator on a particular study. And I think that's going to continue to be the case. Now, if you haven't figured it out by now, emotional intelligence is going to be much more important than actual IQ and actual even medical knowledge. I think RNs are still going to be hired and the ideal CRAs, but I don't think RNs last long in that role. I think RNs move up to some of the other roles I'm going to get into. But I think the CRAs are gonna have to be more problem solvers, and they're gonna have personality types where sites want to actually engage, and that's gonna evolve the role into community engagement specialist or site engagement specialist. The industry is shifting as a whole. In this decade, so let's call it from 2025 to 2035. I think we are in the site-centric decade. I'm on record saying this is the golden era for sites. And that's primarily because sites are being catered to. Sites are where the rubber meets the road. Sites are literally where the action happens. The industry talks about action everywhere, but the action happens at the site during a coordinator's interaction with a patient. Now, the CRA is ancillary to this interaction. So you have the coordinator and the patient and the PI, maybe the sub-I, they're all there. The CRA is kind of revolving around the sun like a planet, right? Like one of many planets revolving around the sun being the site. Uh, so I just came up with a new new metaphor, but the site is basically the sun, and then you have all these other stakeholders kind of revolving around the sun. At least as a site owner, I'm clearly biased in the way I'm thinking about things, but I really do think this next decade is the site centric is the decade for site centricity, is the golden era for research sites. I really do think so. I think sponsors are putting their money where their mouth is. I think they are showing up enthusiastically to things like saveoursites.com. I think tech vendors are being forced to do the same. It used to be that the tech vendors would sell to the CROs, who would then force this technology down to the site level. You got a lot of pushback from sites on that. So now the name of the game is giving the sites the tools voluntarily, letting them choose. So you get this whole new wave of tech vendors that have come in and are really offering value. If you look at tools like the sponsors of my podcast, Creo, Inato, and then if you look at things that I'm involved with, Patient Ace, Gleam, there's a couple other ones. These are all voluntary. Like sites choose to use this stuff. No one's forcing us to use it. And I think that CRAs are going to have to understand this changing landscape. That is facilitating a more direct flow of conversation or workflow, maybe, between the site and the sponsor, to where historically you relied on a CRA and a CRO to kind of control the flow of data and information between site to sponsor. Now it's going directly. So CRAs are really more cheerleaders for sites and coaches. I think that's probably the right way to look at it. The CRAs used to be looked at like police officers for sites. Like, hey, we're here to catch things. Now they're looked at like those things are being caught with or without a human. We're here to actually prevent things from happening. We're here to coach you on how to do better. We're here to coach you on how to not come across those issues. And I think that's a different archetype. I think when I started in the industry, the CRAs were, for the most part, cut from a different cloth. And yeah, I had a few mentor me because they knew I was new, but their archetype was not empathetic or, come here, let me help you. It was more like, this is the way we do things. Why don't you learn it this way? I'm gonna teach you this, but you have to learn how to do this. Like it was very uh authoritarian, and it's becoming less so. And so the archetypes are changing. Like the best CRAs now are pleasant. They understand that they're in a relationship with the coordinator as a team member. They're on the same page. They both work for the sponsor, and they both work to keep patients safe, ultimately. And so you're seeing a lot of new roles emerge because the archetype of a CRA is changing and the industry is changing. The future roles for CRAs will change. Emerging niche roles you haven't considered. I do think, and I'm seeing this anecdotally through my consulting service, DSCS. So if you need help getting sites for your studies for your site or negotiating your contracts and budgets for your site, I'm here to help along with Chris Sauber. But you're seeing a lot of CRAs looking towards site ownership. Hey, I've been at enough sites, I've coached enough coordinators. I think I can do this on my own. And they're actually not wrong in that regard. And I'm on the record stating I think it's actually easier to be a site owner, stress-wise, than it is to be a CRA. Now, there's some financial stress you got to worry about when you go in business for yourself. No one's guaranteeing you that paycheck. That income either comes or it doesn't based on what you catch as a site owner, as an entrepreneur. But I think once you've reached critical mass, meaning 3 or 4 studies, where you can consistently enroll and yeah, you can grow, but your floor is like 3 or 4 studies. I think you have a predictable cash flow and revenue stream, and I think CRAs are starting to gravitate more towards entrepreneurship, and a lot of that is site ownership because they go to so many sites. After a while, they start thinking, I think I can do this, and then they reach out to us and we help them out. And they do well. The new type of CRA does well. From the past, the police officer archetype CRA did less well. These new breed that are more emotionally intelligent and they have way more soft skills, which is what you need to be a business person. Like ultimately that becomes salesmanship and influence. Those are transferable skills now with the new archetype of CRA influence, meaning let me convince this site that the way they're doing things are wrong and it's not good for them, nor the study, nor the patient, to let me convince a sponsor that my site is a good fit for this study. Like those are transferable skill sets, right? So site ownership and entrepreneurship is definitely one. But there's also this emerging role that I discussed called site liaisons. And yeah, RNs make very good people for this role. A lot of the big pharma are having community liaisons. So they're supposed to find sites and ideally new sites in diverse markets that sponsor hasn't worked with before to do more trials. And so these are typically CRAs that have graduated and are now doing this site liaison role. And those are usually like similar to like the pharma sales rep or the medical science liaisons. They have a territory, they have a region. So you might have one that does Arizona and some of Southern California. You might have one that does just Phoenix. You might have one that does all of Arizona except Phoenix. Or you might have one that does Orange County in California and Los Angeles. It just depends on the company itself. But I think these community liaisons are an emerging role that we have not even seen the beginnings of yet. So if you're a pessimist in this space and thinking, man, AI is here to replace us all, I would tell you no. I would tell you to hang in there. I would tell you to work more on your soft skills and your emotional intelligence and your influence and your likability. A lot of you old school CRAs out there that are still here, you're not very likable, and that's a problem. So you need to work on those things to have a chance for these kind of roles. The entrepreneur, of course, but if you're not going the entrepreneurship route and you want to go the employee route, the community site liaison route. I think that's an emerging career. There's more. There's trial technologists. So these are starting to come out as well. The clinical trial technologist. Because CRAs are essentially tech savvy, you kind of have to be when there's 20 portals per study and the sites come to you when they don't work. You're essentially a glorified help desk. These professionals are now at the intersection of technology and research. And there's a lot of tech vendors out there. I mentioned a few already. Typically, they look to market to sites, but they love marketing to the sponsors. And if you're a CRA that works for a lot of sponsors or CROs, you're probably a good fit for one of these roles as well. So, implementing and managing the various platforms, EDC, IRT, remote monitoring, CTMS, I mean, there's so many. Here's the part. Here's where the magic happens. It's when they seamlessly integrate and when the data flows autonomously. We're trying to do that ourselves. We have this thing called Monday.com that we use at my site. It can kind of automate some emails to go into a workspace. It can automate some of our patient A stuff. There's a lot of automations you can do with calendars, but I'm talking the next level of automations is automating these tools that are not really meant to talk to each other. So these digital platforms and research that have been very much walled gardens, I think those walls are going to come down. Another role is data privacy and ethics specialists. So with the rise of all this digital data collection, safeguarding this information is more critical than ever, and these specialists ensure that trials are compliant with regulations like GDPR and HIPAA. If you don't know what those things are, especially GDPR, it's going to become increasingly important. I would say take a side note, go Google it. I'm going to put a side note for myself to do a video on this because I have not done one yet. But that's General Data Protection Regulation. It's really a European Union regulation, but a lot of the states, like California, for example, kind of leans more heavily on this kind of regulation. So if you're a CRA, you got to know the most strict regulation and work your way down. Because typically the whatever is the most strict regulation, even though you're in a state like Arizona where that's not the case, we're not under GDPR. A lot of sponsors will expect that my site operates in that framework as well. It just becomes an industry best practice. So you got to learn this stuff. Um, I mean, there's a lot of roles. There's patient engagement strategists, which is another one that I think CRAs and we've seen CROs try to do this before too. And again, this is a RN type of role. This is an international medical graduate type of role. This is a pharmacist type of role. Keeping patients engaged and retained, especially if they go decentralized trial. The industry loves this. They're trying to push for this. I think what we'll ultimately have is a bunch of hybrid studies where there's sites, but then patients have the option to do some visits from home, some visits from the office. And with this hybrid change, this paradigm shift, you need ways to keep patients engaged. And whether these people are employed by the sites, which would make sense to me, or whether they're employed by the sponsor or CRO, or both, which knowing our industry, typically overkill is the answer. There will be role patient engagement strategists. So I think this is using digital tools or strategies to improve communication, manage consent, and enhance the overall patient experience. I hope you're noticing the theme of EQ is more important than IQ. I'm literally on the record. I have receipts on my channel from 2012. 2012, I am discussing this very change that has happened. 2012, we still had heavy IQ based CRAs. We need to hire the smartest people because they need to go in there like Navy SEALs and find these issues. Now, with these tools getting better, we need EQ. And what ended up happening, there was a bunch of assholes that the industry hired. That's changed. The CRAs lately, the last 5 years, have been relatively pleasant. You still have some outliers here and there. For the most part, the industry's done a good job at that. And I think that's important. And all those high IQ people, they moved on in research to roles where they don't really have to interact with people too much. Like, um, they might put them in regulatory affairs, or they might put them in these leadership roles where they don't have to interact with people too much. Maybe a data scientist, med tech integration specialist. They're just working with tools and a few people. And for those people, there are roles that I just mentioned, clinical data scientist, AI and machine learning specialist, and a med tech integration specialist. So if you know in your heart of hearts you are IQ and can never become EQ, there's roles for you too. So and still try. You'll surprise yourself. I think that's a lot. I think if you want to future-proof your research career, if you get nothing else out of this video, emotional intelligence wins because the machines can't do that. And then if you're going to focus on developing skills, I think you need to do data literacy, technology proficiency, risk-based monitoring, strategic networking, saveoursites.com. Especially if we're in the golden era of sites, you need to go to where the real sites are. Not the spokespeople for sites that they delegate to go represent them at these big industry conferences. No, the small grassroots conferences like Save Our Sites, where it's cheap enough to where the site owner can bring his or her staff, which is what we do, which is what all my colleagues do. So that's what I think your career's headed as a CRA and beyond. I hope this was helpful. Let me know what you think. Like, subscribe, comment, share. I'll catch you later. Bye bye.